This week on Crowd, we're joined by Natalie Eve-Williams. Natalie is a producer and presenter on BBC Introducing Manchester. She's also a guest lecturer and advisor at BIM, and she's recently launched a new organisation called On Your Doorstep Manchester. We're going to be looking at how people in the music industry and artists build their audience and their crowd. Natalie, welcome to Crowd. Lovely to have you here.
Oh, lovely to be here. It's very posh.
Well, you know, we do try. So I think obviously you've done many things through your career. I know you from your time at BBC Manchester. I've been listening to you for a couple of years with the Introducing shows, which you're now a producer of. Mm-hmm. You pretty much started that, didn't you?
I was part of the team. I didn't present at first. It was Sam Walker. I was still doing a show called Manchester Music when Introducing first started with Conrad Murray, who's now one of the head honchos at SJM, and Terry Christian, the broadcaster. And I did that alongside Michelle Hussey, and we used to kind of basically do what Introducing went on to do, but on a smaller scale, and it was an integral part of Manchester Music. And then Jason Carter, who was head of Radio 1 at the time, decided to kind of brand all the new music shows on BBC Local and call them BBC Introducing. And that was in 2007, October, I think. And then it just kind of spiraled from there, and now it's like the biggest new music platform in the world. You know, we've got stages at South by Southwest, New York Jazz Festival, every major festival in the UK, playlists on, you know, all the BBC stations, really, even Radio 3. If you're making classical stuff, you can get on there via Introducing. So it's done all right, hasn't it?
It's done pretty well. I mean, I don't think I could name a single major artist that's not gone through that process of being on the local Introducing programme.
There is a lot, yeah, in the last 10 years or so especially. It's even if, you know, they've not gone directly through them, they've been played on a show or, you know, had opportunities through it. So it's fantastic what it's done for new artists.
Yeah. I think probably Manchester's biggest band at the minute, Pale Waves, came through your Introducing show not long ago, didn't they? 1975. Tom Walker, there's a lot of really big names that have come through that. So, yeah, and I think, obviously, at Crowd, we talk about how you build audiences, and I think you've got a really interesting perspective on this, because not only have you built your audience, and then
all three
you've been a major integral part of building many different artists' audiences. And then obviously you've got your own business as well now that you're building a fresh audience from new, and then the work that you do at BIM, helping brand new artists that might have never recorded, just started college, and now they start to build that presence. So I guess you've got a really broad view of it. What is your favourite part of it? Is it that initial kind of building of an audience, or helping other people?
I think helping other people, probably. Because it's a weird one. I always forget, like, especially presenting, I always forget that was on the radio. It was just like having people in whose music I loved and chatting to them and going to gigs. So it was never kind of a radio job for me. When I was doing daytime stuff on radio, it was a completely different world. But with Introducing, it was more a labour of love. Yeah. Just because, you know, and at BIM as well, getting to see artists who've never played a gig or never recorded before, and being able to pass on little nuggets of stuff from working with all these other artists over the years. I get quite emotionally attached to the artists. So when someone gets signed, or, you know, at a first gig, you like, you know, the rest of the team are the same as well. You know, because there's been a few artists who've come through BIM and Introducing, and we've been there, you know, there's been people from BIM there and people like from the other work there. And other artists as well, and it is quite emotional when you know how hard they've worked, and they've put a lot into it with no money most of the time. You know what it's like, and then, you know, to play the first gig at like Sound Control or somewhere, I think was one of the big ones where a lot of people did the first gigs. You get quite quite emotional.
Yeah, I think the thing that a lot of people don't realise, because they see lots of things in the music industry and it looks like it's awash with money, when I think we both know that it's far from, particularly for emerging artists. I mean, most of these people at best have a part-time job to be able to afford the time for what they do. So it's minimal budgets, but they've somehow got to attract a massive fan base. And with the way the music industry's changed, it's not like the days of Motown where there were lots of A&R people all over the place, going out to gigs, going to the small venues and finding someone thinking, yeah, I can make that person famous. It's all about data now. It's like people watching who's got the views on YouTube and TikTok and Spotify. Yeah. So you've almost got to be famous to get signed to be famous. And there's this big gulf that is kind of existing now where people need to find clever ways of sort of building the crowd or their audience, but on next to no money. Yeah. And obviously working with lots of new artists at BIM, what kinds of things do you suggest that they do that on those really minimal budgets they can do?
Well, doing lots of stuff yourself, so self-recording, and there's some brilliant like software that you can get to record. Some of the demos that I've heard of students who've only been recording during lockdown have sounded like they've been done in a studio somewhere. They've really knuckled down. That's been one good thing actually about lockdown. A lot of artists who, probably didn't have time before because of day jobs and stuff, have been like locking themselves away because they've not had to go into uni. So they've been like really honing the craft on recording and producing their own stuff with amazing results.
Yeah. So, I guess Billie Eilish famously, her and her brother recorded that 5 Grammy winning album in the bedroom of the garage or something, didn't they? So
it's like when Spring King did their debut album, I think that was recorded in a toilet cubicle or a wardrobe or something ridiculous. But it can be done, the software's there now. Years ago, it was kind of people just racing in garages and saving up to get a session in a studio. Yeah. But there's that much that you can do yourself now. I know that's part of the great thing about BIM in Manchester. They've got all these different people from different parts of the industry giving all this advice to the students and kind of being there and mentoring them as well, which is brilliant.
Yeah. I guess this will probably cover across whether it's what you've done with the Beeb or what you're doing with Doorstep or BIM, but culture is something that I've seen working, whether it's in music or in business. Culture seems to be quite important. Is that something that you see as being quite fundamental to people, like whether it's plugging into social consciousness and things and important things that are going on at this point in time, or being socially aware, or the kind of culture that bands and artists portray to the audience to bring people in? Do you think that's something that you're seeing as being quite important?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's always been evident in music, hasn't it? Especially with different genres, like whether it's a punk movement or whether it's blues. I think now people, especially younger artists, are a lot more socially aware because of social media. They might not have read the paper years ago, but they're all on social media, and it's quite easy to understand what's going on politically and socially now than it was when I was their age all those years ago. Because people have open conversations. If you go on Twitter and see if something's trending, you can get a range of opinions on it. People break it down into layman's terms. So it's kind of, I think, and people feel a responsibility as well. A lot of the younger artists, with the Black Lives Matter movement, there was an artist called Kay Remy who recorded this incredible piece of music for us for introducing. He did an acoustic version of his song Black, and it was, I remember when me and Roche first played it, we were just sat there.
It was amazing.
It was honestly out of it reminded me of when Dave performed at the Brits, and it was that kind of everybody fell silent. Well, it was like that, but just me and Roche sat in the newsroom like. But it was, again, and that's the thing where people who might have been a fan of his work before or heard stuff will be listening to that and asking questions and wanting to know more. So yeah, it's really important. And LGBTQ plus community in Manchester, it's like, there's a lot more kind of movements and events and like support there for artists now who never really had that years ago. Things are talked about a lot more openly now, and I think that's, it can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I think if we look back to the 1960s, music played a really pivotal role in cultural movements anyway.
Yeah.
And I think through the 2000s and what I tend to call the Simon Cowell era, that kind of died off a little bit. I know, but it wasn't it? It was quite kind of like, let's not upset anybody, stay middle of the road. And those protest songs died to things like Marvin Gaye's, his entire back catalogue, to be fair.
What's going on, the full album.
Yeah. But I think it definitely seems that there is more social awareness and people are kind of looking to get involved, and the whole of the music industry seemed to come together around Black Lives Matters, and we had the day where everybody went silent, and it does help to kind of inform the conversation and actually helps move things forward. But do you see that being something that will become more of like more artists standing for something, more brands standing for something than we've seen over the last maybe sort of 15 or 20 years, and actually taking a stand and risking losing fans or risking losing customers if it's a brand by standing for something? What do you think?
I think 100%. I had this conversation yesterday actually with a student, and we were talking about, you know, social, economic backgrounds for artists and stuff, and that thing like you've just said of that brand association, people are calling out people and brands a lot more now. So people are applauding artists who are standing up and saying, well, you know, whether it's Zara Larsson being called fat and she's a size 12, you know, calling out people in the industry, calling out brands who are kind of, you know, using cultural appropriation. You know, it is, social media is great for that in a way, because people aren't getting away with the stuff that they got away with years ago, whether it's, you know, sexism or whatever form of kind of like exploitation, it gets called out. And I think, you know, brands and kind of big labels and these big industry people used to have that power more, and now it's kind of gone back into the hands of the people because of social media. People will call it out and retweet and kind of shame people who've, you know, gone on the wrong side of the track.
I'm sure it's causing lots of publicists absolute nightmares.
Oh yeah, don't envy them.
But I mean, even like footballers like Marcus Rashford last year with what he said about school meals, and he was absolutely right. But to use that kind of platform when you're at that level, and I think, I can't remember the name of the chap, but there's a senior person at Unilever in the newspaper the other week talking about how the brands that they've got, on Unilever, for anyone who doesn't know, are a massive FMCG business, and the bulk of the brands that they've got that are growing are brands that they call brands with purpose. So they actually do stand for something, whether it's something about the environment or something else, that they're the brands that are growing. And I think even people, I mean, I'm not a Man United fan, but I had to take my hat off to Marcus Rashford for what he did.
Who hasn't?
Yeah, and across all, I mean, there's not many things that'll get a Man City fan or a Blackburn fan to say anything nice about a Man United play, but fair enough. But yeah, I think, do you think it's going to be something that there'll be bands and artists that start to actually not just stand for something, but start to inform the music based on more culture issues, and taking a bit of a risk of potentially losing fans or being cancelled by taking a particular stand?
Yeah, 100%. Again, it's going back to that thing. I think people are not afraid to, you know, talk about stuff now and to call stuff out and to be themselves. You know, there's that whole thing about, another conversation that I've had recently about, you know, the branding side of an artist. If you want to be a commercial artist in this industry, you kind of have to play the game a bit and, you know, work as a brand. You are a business, you know, you're functioning as a business. Or do you want to go down the route where you're kind of still doing it on the side, but you've got another day job? So there is an element of that. But I think people are braver now because they feel like they've got more support when they're speaking out about, you know, being bullied, or speaking about, you know, not being afraid to say who they are as an artist. I mean, look at Little Nas X. You know, we were saying this about when he did Old Town Road. The whole country community was up in arms. He's gay, he's black, and he's part of the country music scene. There was a lot of kind of that part of it that was frowned upon. But then the majority of people were kind of, you know, backing him up and saying it's all right. Frank Ocean, another one. I think people are heard more, aren't they, because of social media. For all its sins, you know, there is a good side to it for things like that. And I do think that this movement of, you know, speaking about political stuff, especially in the last few years, I've noticed a lot of that at BBC Introducing, a lot more uploads that have kind of touched on like cultural stuff and social stuff.
One of the biggest albums of 2019, Sam Fender. I think when you actually get to the roots and start to listen to the lyrics, that is a protest album along the lines of like a Frank Turner or someone like that. But I think obviously they're great tunes, but you're starting to see a little bit more of it coming through, and it becomes part of the brand. And I think like you touched on an interesting point there of like how once you want to go to that next level and become a really big artist, you almost become a brand and a product. And I think a lot of artists kind of struggle with that transition, and doing things like going on TikTok, being a big presence on Instagram. People don't want to be the Instagram star or the TikTok star and then get taken seriously in music. And it's a very fine balance, isn't it? What do you talk to students about, and some of the emerging artists that you speak to, about how to kind of play that to its advantage without taking away from what they are as an artist?
I think it's never a one size fits all kind of answer for that. It depends on what kind of artist you are. And I always say, like, what do you want? You know, you're an artist, but like, where do you want to be? You know, what's your ultimate goal? Do you want to be kind of in the charts, commercial, playing Key 103's Christmas extravaganza, whatever it is, at the arena? Or do you want to keep that kind of underground feel where, you know, you're a bit more experimental, you've got full creative control, and you're on, you know, a bit of a cooler label? Everyone wants to make a living out of it, obviously. That's like the dream, isn't it? Not having to do a day job. But again, it's two different worlds to me. You know, artists that can just continually tour for years at smaller venues and kind of have that bit more credibility, especially amongst the peers. You know, there's nothing wrong with going commercial, you know, playing arenas and stuff, but it's up to you as an artist. It's a very personal choice. You know, if you're comfortable with that. I remember Blossoms coming in and saying, we want to be big, we want it. They knew straight away what they wanted to do. They wanted to go and do the arenas, they wanted to go and do these big tours and big kind of commercial. Other artists, that's like the worst nightmare, like the shudder when you say it to her. You know, if somebody says kind of change your production style on that, or change this around, change your image, it's like, no. You kind of got to have a little bit of compromise, like we said before, but I think it just depends on what you want as an artist. Because I would never push anyone in a direction. You can advise and get as much advice as you can. Don't just listen to one person. Don't be afraid of asking, you know, as many people as possible for feedback on your songs, for, you know, ideas, inspiration, feedback on your live sets, whatever it is. As many kind of criticisms, and as long as they're constructive, obviously, you can take on board. You know, that's only a good thing, and then you can kind of pick and choose what feels right. I would say if something doesn't feel right, if there's a red flag there, you should really follow it.
I think a lot of the artists that I've spoke to, I think it's a very sort of one way or the other kind of choice. Whereas I think I've always seen it as use social media, but choose how to use social media. So it is a really important component of getting out there, and it's a really cheap way to get out there if you do it right. And I think often it's about, they think if I do it on Instagram, I'm going to lose any credibility. But in actual fact, when you look at any other product out there, if you said, okay, so you've got all these different channels that you can advertise on, you can send emails, you can go on social media, you can have a TV advert, but we're not going to do this one, like they'd be like, well, then we're going to miss out on X number of customers or fans or audience or crowd, or however you look at it. Do you think it's not quite as black and white an option as do it or not, but doing something that fits in with
social media?
Yeah, just social media in general.
I think everybody needs social media. You know, I interviewed idols a while back, and Joe was saying he called it a cesspit. He's like, I hate social media. Someone else runs like their account. But again, it's that connection between an artist and their fan base. You know, as long as you've got boundaries, you know, there is can overshare sometimes and kind of take away that bit of mystery, because you still want that there with an artist, don't you? You don't want them, you know, mentioned it before, like holiday pictures and stuff like that. Pictures of the tea. But I think, you know, getting an insight into somebody's world, whether it's filming bits of rehearsals or recordings, or just little updates, little pieces to camera. JP Cooper was really good at that. He'd just be like, before anyone else was doing it, in my knowledge, he'd be like, oh, just with his phone walking down the road, just come out the studio, hope you're all okay. But it's that connection without being over familiar, but you feel like, especially people who've followed an artist for years from like tiny little gigs, it's that connection thing. And
Lewis Capaldi's the other one that I thought he was a comedian when I first came across him on Instagram.
With all the Noel Gallagher stuff.
Yeah, and then I heard him singing. I was like,
well,
he's not a bad singer.
Liam Gallagher. I've got to say, Liam Gallagher on Twitter.
He's hilarious.
There's
no two-way conversations, is there? But he is hilarious.
But it's Liam Gallagher being Liam Gallagher.
Yeah.
It's genius. It's brilliant. It's comedy. Sometimes he can get really emotional on it. It's brilliant. The whole thing with his solo career, with the album that Simon Aldred from Cherry Ghost kind of wrote most of the album, and it did phenomenal. And he really started taken seriously as a solo artist from that point.
Yeah, it was.
But he's never lost that edge, has he?
No, but I think that gig that he randomly did in Hull, of all places, was like the turning point for me a couple of years ago. To this day, I don't know why he chose Hull, but it was a great venue and a superb gig. But I think that was a point when a lot of people went, "Oh, he can do this on his own."
Yeah,
but yeah. I think he's kind of kept up a presence, but like you say, he's kept up being Liam Gallagher, hasn't he?
You've seen another side to him, haven't you?
Yeah.
That like a real caring human side to him as well, but he's still like funny and still close to the bone sometimes. I think
that kind of takes me on to the next question, which is about how you talk to a crowd or an audience, and I think that's a really good example of it was very consistent of what you've seen, and it's refined, but it's still what you're getting, and there is a definite like tone to like what he says that is definitively Liam, isn't it? So do you think is that something that you've done like through your shows, through the advice that you give an artist, and with what you're doing now with Doorstep? Is there a certain way? Because I've always seen you as being just like, it's just Natalie being Natalie.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no like.
I can't be anything else.
But it's not like you go on air and like your voice changes and your octave goes up a one or two. It's like you're just doing you, aren't you?
Yeah, I think people can tell when you're not doing you. I'll admit, like when I've done daytime and stuff, and because early on people have said, "Oh, you're so mank." I'm like, well, at first you got a bit conscious about it. Now it's like, I'm from Manchester. I'm not going to go and start talking like this in like a commercial radio voice. People have just slapped me. But and it's like that interaction when we've had artists come on the show, or even when we've done stuff on Your Doorstep. It's more of a conversation, like with me and you. It's like I don't feel like we're having an interview. It's like we can chat for England. But I think that's really important, especially when people are doing the first radio or first filming or whatever, to kind of have that personable level. You can have an artist who can go and play in front of 2,000 people, but if you sat them down in front of a radio mic, they'd clam up.
I know,
some of them, and it's like... So we're like, oh, don't worry about that, get a brew. And we've had some amazing interviews because people forget that, we did as well, in fairness, a few times, forget that you're on air. So it's like a really natural conversation. And as a listener, that's my favourite kind of radio.
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky to come in to introduce him with Elise Mason 18 months ago. Yeah. But she hates like having to be interviewed. But with you guys, you turn up and you're like, "Hey Elise, do you want a brew?" And it's really, really comfortable and easy. And I think she forgets that like that's an interview. There's a mic there, but yeah, it just flows easily, doesn't it?
That's been like, we've been really, really blessed. It sounds dead corny, but we've been really lucky that the artists that we've worked with on introducing Manchester over the last like 15 years, oh my God. We've kind of made friends with a lot of them because there's been a trust thing there, because they know that, we're playing the music because we genuinely like it and we want them to do well, and, opportunities come up, we'll always like remember them, or if we're at a gig, we'll remember people's names and genuinely be rooting for them.
Yeah, you seem to have had a really great way of building loyalty with your listeners and with the artists as well. And that's probably something that will carry through to what you do with Doorstep. But I think it's quite rare that you've got at both sides, you've built this like level of loyalty, and like you know that you're always going to get like anyone that you ask to go on the show, they're always going to come. And even like some of the bands that you've had on when they've got really big, they still come back and do your show because you were there right at the beginning.
That's really lovely. That's a nice feeling when people remember you. You know, not just remember like when they got played on Radio 1 or whatever, but when they remember, I remember the first time I came in and we were really nervous or blah, blah, blah. It is a nice feeling. You know, who wants to be remembered as a tosser? Nobody. But I think that's a big part of like the whole scene in Manchester. You know, most people who I know who work on radio and other stations and stuff, you become friends with them because they just sound, you know, I think it's a Manchester thing as well. It's, you know, being real. People who are real, people sniff you out a mile if you're not real, especially around here. Do you think that's what's kept your audience so loyal though? Just always being yourself, always being real, giving people time. Are they the key things, do you think? I'd like to think so. I mean, you'd have to ask them. I don't want to presume, but because I don't think I think it's never an us and them thing. You know, when you listen to some radio shows, it can be very much the presenter and the guest, or they can be kind of like an ego thing. More so in telly, I'd say, than radio. But yeah, it's more, again, it's that thing of, you know, oh God, do you remember when you did that gig at such a place? Oh yeah, blah, blah, blah. It's more of a, like, we're on a level. Yeah. And most of them stay the same as well when they've made it really big. Yeah,
and you've always really been out and about watching the gigs and taking as much as you can. I guess like a lot of us, you probably missed it over the last 12 months. God.
I know.
Like, how are you going to feel going to gigs when they come back on? When are we going to get gigs, do you think? Is it going to be this year or?
I think it will be. It's like the devil in the deep blue sea, isn't it? Because I can't wait to go back and watch a live band, but also the thought of being in that crowd situation with loads of people breathing on you gives me anxiety. There's
lots of things that we used to do that will look insane now. The first one that comes to mind is birthdays and blowing out the candles on the birthday cake. Oh, God, that's dead, right? That's never happening again. But
don't that's just give me the fear.
The other one is like, I used to go to 3 or 4 gigs a week, and the amount of times that you'd be at the front of a bigger gig and someone would come along with a couple of plastic glasses of bottles of water and everyone would just pass it around like that's probably not happening again, is it? To be fair.
Sweat dripping on you and stuff.
Beer going in the air at every concert. Yeah. So, do you think gig venues,
we just
concerts?
Put everybody off.
I know. But at the same time, I can't wait to go and get beer thrown on me and jump around in a mosh pit at the Academy or a Band on the Wall or something. Like.
I can't wait. I think everything's going to happen, but I think it's going to be done very differently. You know, it's got to be, hasn't it?
Is it going to go more cabaret? Is it going to be more like sit down?
I'd love that.
Somewhere like, yeah, no, it would be great, wouldn't it? But like,
waiter service.
Yeah, but like these sort of like
area.
Films like The Godfather, where they go on, they like table for 4, big stage.
I always wanted to open one of those clubs in Manchester.
I think it'd work now.
Let's do it.
I think people would be really comfortable going to do that kind of thing. Like
trademark it.
Cut this bit out.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, I think it's going to change, isn't it? And I think where the industry has been that sort of pyramid sort of size of like a handful of people making a lot of money, I think there's probably going to be opportunity for lots of smaller venues with that kind of setup, and lots of people that were probably struggling will get £300 a weekend type gigs that will probably see them actually making a decent living. And granted, they might have to do cover type things and a little bit of original stuff, but maybe the whole thing will change completely. And
we've said for years and years about Manchester not having enough outdoor space with heaters. It's like when you go abroad, you love sitting outside if it's sunny. In Manchester, it used to be like you've got 4 places everybody would like leg it to.
Yeah.
Now, you know, it's becoming more pedestrianised, obviously, because of COVID and everything. I want it to stay like that. I love seeing people out on the streets in Manchester having something to eat, obviously the weather permitting. But I think, you know, that hospitality side, if they kind of build on that and, you know, get some covers with heaters maybe in some of the areas, I think that's going to be a big thing on building tourism in Manchester as well, because I think that we have been lacking that. You know, if you go anywhere, if you go to New York, I always say I see Manchester now, how New York was like 20 years ago. We're kind of following exactly what
people
they've
often
been
say
doing.
that Manchester's a mini London. I've always said Manchester's a mini New York.
It is 100%.
Yeah, it's nothing.
100%.
Nothing like New York. It's nothing like London. It's definitely more like New
Yeah.
York. But yeah, I think when you see what the trends are there, that tends to, like you say,
Well,
so 10, 20 years later.
Yeah, the whole kind of music scene over there and the little pockets of the city, and the way that it's expanding now, you know, into all the kind of suburban areas. It's just exactly what New York did 20 years ago.
What would you say Manchester's CBGBs is? Where's that place that all those...
Night and Day, it's got to be on it.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. It's between Night and Day.
Down the road down.
I think it depends on the genre, doesn't it? It's probably between the Whiskey Jar, Night and Day, and the Castle, and Jimmy's, and Band on the Wall. There's just loads of venues, isn't there?
I would say Night and Day has been kind of the one that's been there and seen so many artists from all different kind of genres and different decades come through. I think that's kind of the one and it's got the most stories. Night and Day. Everyone's got a Night and Day story. You know, you've seen people from all over the world play there, but you've also seen bands from Greater Manchester come through and kind of learn their craft there. So I would say Night and Day is probably the CBGBs.
So another interesting thing, so obviously lots of artists try to go to a handful of really big cities to make it. So London, New York, LA, generally the big three. I'm often asked like where people should go and whether they should go to London. What I've observed, and I don't know if you've seen the same thing from artists that have made it, London, LA, New York seem like a good option, but for artists that are emerging, that are still trying to make it, London seems like the last place on earth that you could afford to be in that stage. And Manchester seems to be attracting a massive chunk of the emerging artists in the UK who then go on and do stuff, and they might go and move to LA, but there's something about the city, isn't there, that seems to be bringing people from all over the place. I mean, I've watched people that are Manchester based from Chile, from America, from France, Germany, never mind Hull and Blackpool and the other places.
Blackburn.
And Blackburn.
Is that a good accent there?
That was really good, actually. Yeah, you nailed that one, Blackburn.
But yeah, I know what you mean. It's, again, going back to, you know, whether it's introducing and it's artists that have come from Canada or California or where, you know, somewhere else beginning with C, that kind of are drawn to Manchester because of its musical history, not just because of factory records, but because, you know, going back to like the 70s, all the stuff that was going on, we kind of, you know, we never shouted about it as well like London did. You know, there was that much that started here, and I think that's kind of carried on throughout the years. There's always something going on in Manchester, and it's not necessarily from Mancunians. It can be from people from elsewhere that just make Manchester their home because of, like what we were saying before, there's a kind of a nice network of people. There's loads of nice little venues to play when you're starting off. There's a lot of support from other artists. People are easy to talk to, so you make good connections, you know, and kind of you just get to know. You could be sat in a pub in Manchester and end up talking, when you just never know who you'll end up talking to. And that's how I've made some great connections in pubs in Manchester and got work out of it, and vice versa. There's been somebody who's worked behind a bar somewhere or in a shop, and you get talking, and it's, oh, you work for introducing? Oh, my son's in a band, have a listen. Yeah. But people talk.
People mix as well.
Yeah.
I think one of the greatest things from Motown Records was the fact that you'd get all those artists. So you get Marvin Gaye doing backing vocals on a Jackson 5 track. You'd have Stevie Wonder putting the keys down for Smokey Robinson.
It's just like a big loving.
Yeah, and I see that around Manchester. It's something that you don't see in the bigger cities. There's a chap called Ollie Walton that you see playing keys in about 7 different bands. There's like, people kind of do a lot of things together, and it seems that you've got a bunch of artists kind of growing together and bringing each other up as they do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite a rare thing, that there's something about this city, isn't there, that seems to bring
everybody,
really bring people in.
There's obviously a few exceptions, it's the music industry, but as a general rule, people genuinely want people to do well.
Yeah.
And I think that is part of the attraction of Manchester, because people are rooting for the underdog all the time, because we've always been the underdog compared to London. I think there is kind of that thing where there is a big nurture inside, people who have, like bands like A Certain Ratio working with the Oriels and that kind of dynamic, bigger producers kind of on the rap scene and grime scene and stuff are bringing through people, Bipolar Sunshine. He was our first ever interview on Manchester Music when me and Michelle joined. Adeo from that band, he's just won a Grammy for Brown Skin Girl.
Yeah. And
he still talks to, Nina Cobham, all these brilliant artists that are coming through from Manchester. He'll actively say, if you're from Manny, give us a shout if you need anything. You don't see that anywhere else. You
don't see it in many of the business models, do you?
No.
So like, if you think, if you're Coca-Cola, you want to kill Pepsi, but in music, it's not like you're going to listen to one artist and then not another. The more similar sounding artists that you find, you probably want to find more. And like one of the few things that I would say is a big positive of the likes of Spotify and Apple Music and the subscription services is you're not competing to buy one album at a weekend. It's not like when I was a kid, I used to go to HMV. I had a tenner, and I could buy one album, and that was it. So they were competing
all week because you were like,
and you'd listen to it start to finish. Now it's like, if I want to download 1,000 albums on a Friday and sit there until sometime in 2 months' time listening to them, like, you can't you? So
I think the good thing about streaming services is it's like, you used to have record booths, didn't you, years ago? Even before my time, it was that long ago, where you could like listen to an album. Whereas now you can kind of try stuff out, like with Spotify, with you recommend stuff. If you're listening to, say, Matil or somebody like that, it'll be, have you tried listening to these artists? Yeah. And I found so many artists through that, and then gone and bought the vinyl. Yeah. Or, gone on the Bandcamp and done it. So it can work in their favour that way, like from a PR side, but I don't even get me started on the artist royalties from streaming sites, because it is just ridiculous.
That's a whole other podcast, isn't it?
It's 5 parts of that.
Yeah, definitely. We'll try and dodge that one. What I would say about, obviously, with streaming services and the fact that there's access to more music, it becomes really important to keep fans loyal, keep the crowd engaged. With all that noise out there and everything that's going on across social media, what do you suggest that artists do, and obviously the people from brands that'll watch this, and there is more of a crossover than people realise between what's happening in music and what's happening in all brands, but what do you do to keep, with all that noise going on, to keep a crowd engaged?
It's $1 million question. Again, it depends on what kind of artist you are. Some people are really good at doing the short bursts of stuff on socials and teasers and little insights into what they're doing. It's not a one size fits all thing. I'm trying to think of a really good example.
No, it is. To be fair, it is probably the million, literally the $1 million questions. I'm sure there's advertising agents out there that you'd spend £1 million to find out what the answer looks like. But what I would definitely say from what I've observed is you can't just be that band like the Counting Crows that will bring an album out every 3 years.
Yeah, but
unless you are a band the size of somebody like Counting Crows or.
But I kind of do have this problem, especially with new artists, where they feel like they've got to be churning stuff out all the time and it's all got to be new. Yeah, because I've seen, artists get really stressed when they've had this date in their head where our debut album's going to be released in May. They're not signed, or they're signed to like a teeny label or self-releasing or whatever. And the stress and the anxiety that's like fixated on this date, or if they've released a song and they've not really had much going on around it, before they've taken advice or had support, the fear of releasing that same song that they released 2 years ago is like, oh, that's old, I've been there. And I'm like, no, no, don't put a sell. People are sick of me saying this. Don't put a sell-by date on songs. Some of the artists that have gone on to be huge have released songs as singles that were demos 5, 6, 7 years before. So don't be afraid of revisiting stuff. If it's good, who's heard it in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah, there's an artist in Manchester at the moment called Mike Dignam that's releasing 52 songs this year. So it's like a constant churn.
I can't even deal with that.
Yeah, and then at the other end you've got, I know, and then at the other end you've got people that will release an album once every 10 years or once every 3 years. But there probably is a medium ground there, isn't there? One thing that the streaming services seem to have forced into happening is albums don't seem to land like they used to. So when I used to go out buy music, I would go out and buy the album and listen to it start to finish for weeks on end and listen to nothing else. But now it's like playlists and individual tracks. So is there any point releasing an album, or are you better off just releasing singles and then put it together as an album?
I think there'll always be a place for albums. If you're a music lover, and it's like Soul, they were my band from the last 18 months and they released 4 albums, didn't they? Like over that space of time. And I still listen to them now. It's like, when Laura Marling released her album, there's still that thing when you get lost in an album, you go back to it. I still listen to albums that I bought in 1989 or whatever, but I think as a music lover, an album will always kind of have a place, no matter which format it's on. Like vinyls, my kids, Mum, them things that you've got called records, someone else's, but I'm like, oh my God, shut up.
Yeah, my niece and nephew have no idea what a cassette is for. never mind an LP. They're just like, what's that? And I'm like, do you know your iPod? Yeah, that was an iPod in the 80s. It had 10 songs on it, and that's all it does fit.
But again, going back to the social media thing, these platforms are getting called out, and this kind of, the Bandcamp Friday thing where it's go and support the artist, buy the merch, buy the vinyl, buy the tape. And people are very kind of aware of that. It's like we do with On Your Doorstep Manchester, we do playlists kind of every week or every fortnight with different artists and stuff. We'll always try and put a link to, always do put a link to their Bandcamp or their website when we post a playlist. So it's like you can have a look at what they're listening to, but also go and check out what they've been buying. Here's the links to buy their stuff or to buy, any of the songs that you like off their playlist. Go and buy, trying to encourage that. So kind of using Spotify or Apple Music or whatever as like a sampler.
Yeah, and I was speaking to somebody from Sony Records. I can't say who, but she was telling me that a number of, I'll tell you off camera. She was telling me that a number of larger artists, the money that they make off Spotify is invested straight back in again to advertise, to then get people to the live gigs where they actually make the money from the merch and selling the tickets and that kind of thing. So this was obviously pre-lockdown and will probably be the business model further down the line, but the streaming money was that little, it was almost used as an advertising vehicle rather than a source of income.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting. And then so what you were talking about with obviously buying albums and your favorite bands, and what we term this on Crowd is really like your in crowd, but like your hardcore fans. Yeah. What is it that makes somebody like a hardcore fan? What brings them in? What makes you love a band for 10 years and 15 years that people can learn from?
I think a lot of that can be really personal, whether it's, if you've been going through something in your life and that certain album resonates with you. Like I was a massive Mary J. Blige fan from being about 14. a lad I used to know who used to play for United. We swapped tapes. I give him the soundtrack to Mo Money, I think it was, and he lent me Mary J. Blige. And from that moment when I listened to that album, I remember taping the soul of MTV on VHS and then finding other artists through that and then ordering the album on import. I remember going into HMV on Market Street and if you got Mary J. Blige, what's the 4-1? What? Mary Jo what? But yeah, I kind of, that reminds me of being 15, awkward, but really loving that. Again, the New York connection was there, but then when My Life album came out and it was like loads of samples of like Roy Ayers and Marvin Gaye on there and Curtis Mayfield, fell in love with it. And because it was so real again, it was like all the drama and all the soul and like, I've just, after seeing her live, that I was sold, that was it. And even now, it's like, I've been all over the world to watch her because it's like part of my life. And I think that's, if you've loved an artist for years and you've been to gigs and you've had children and you've got married or blah, blah, those songs are part of your life. And I think that is where the kind of loyalty lies with it.
It's an emotional connection, isn't it?
Yeah, really emotional.
Yeah. And it surprised me through the last 12 months how little support has been given to those creative artists. And when you talk about like the like going through your life and that emotional connection that you've made, and it is a central part to most people's lives, isn't it? It's the thing that kind of got people through things like lockdown, that's got people through breakups and emotional turmoil and all manner of things. But it's like, what's that go-to thing that people do? And invariably it's music, isn't it? And that's where people find a lot of solace. So it's quite strange that there hasn't been that kind of support. But do you think that kind of ties back as well to like what we're talking about with culture and how you talk to people, but like that message that comes through in those songs of like how important they are? And as we come out of lockdown through 2021, thinking about what kinds of music is that going to inspire? Are we going to have a lot of songs that are about how depressed people are in lockdown, or are people just going on a party and it's like the 1920s all over again, and it's all going to be like, is it just going to be like crazy orgies and drinking too much? Well, and this is fast, happy music.
Me and Roche have had this running joke. Now I'll just say it quickly. So, like, we didn't have a show for 6 months on Introducing because of like recording live and stuff, and then kind of from July last year to now, we were recording the show and we noticed the sexual frustration in songs was real. And we talk about it on air quite openly and we're like in hysterics, corpsing, laughing. And I said, after lockdown, Roche, it'll all be like happy, singing about having kids, singing about reuniting with people. But it was that was a real thing, like the influx of stuff where it was just filth, basically.
Because I mean,
oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, because you are getting all the latest music submitted into Introducing, aren't you? So so that's really.
That was the general feeling in Manchester.
So when the boys open, strap yourselves in, guys. It's gonna be a ride, literally.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. I knew I'd go off on a tangent again at some point. It always happens. But yeah, I think realistically we're probably going to be looking at like a completely different world when things open back up. But I think it does certainly sound like once we've got past those angsty songs, we'll probably be into like party time, won't we?
Yeah.
So that could be interesting.
See you at the gig in a mask with the Dettol spray.
I think obviously you've got Doorstep. Do you want to just tell us a little bit more about the new venture with Doorstep and what that's all about?
Again, another good thing that's come out of lockdown on Your Doorstep Manchester was the brainchild of me and my very good friend Michelle Snowden. Both worked in the music industry previously for like 20 odd years. Under different guises with radio, gigs, reviewing, stuff like that. Both kind of kindred spirits, really, when we met years ago. Both talk a lot, both really passionate about Manchester. Both got children, both got fed up of going to the same places with the kids.
Heaton Park.
But I still have to go there. But it was originally going to be events, stuff that we were doing, and then lockdown, of course, scuppered so many plans. So we just started, it kind of happened really organically, and then again, just kind of got really nice support and people who we've known through the music industry wanting to get involved. You know, like Boner from Oasis, who we used to do the Manchester Music Show with, he's like, we laugh, he's like a number one doorstepper. He's always like sending us pictures in and tweeting, and a lot of the musicians that I've known over the years have done playlists for us. This week's was Steve Diggle from Buzzcocks, which is, you know, for like some of the older generation who were doorsteppers, it's like, it's ace that they can go for a walk and stick Steve Diggle's playlist on, or Graham Park's. Well, I got a message last week saying, I keep going back to that Graham Park playlist when I'm doing my running. It's really helped me. So it's kind of marrying the best bits about Manchester, well-being, music, and that community feel. And it really has become just a genuinely lovely platform.
It sounds like something that you could scale all over the world really easily.
Well, we're in talks with franchising to other areas. This is the thing. There's like, we've had a lot of interest in it. You know, we're not making any money out of it at the minute. We're doing everything out of our own pockets and our own time around kids and jobs. But yeah, we've just had loads of interest in it and just really lovely feedback, which is great.
Yeah, I think there's a massive community spirit that's built up, I think, through the last 12 months. I think people have really appreciated where they're from, the local area, but then combining that with things like music and events when you can do them sounds like a really...
And the mental health side of it as well, but without being, you know, too in your face with it. We kind of say, we'll just leave this here, this phone number or this video from somebody at Mind or whatever. So it all works really nicely together.
But then here's a great walk to go on and a great playlist to go with it. It's kind of like matching posh food and posh wine together, isn't it?
And music, who would have thought of that?
Who would have thought? Well, thank you very much, Natalie, for coming in. It's been great. I'm sure we'll have to do another part. We'll definitely have to do a part about streaming services and
of all sorts.
Yeah, we could probably talk all day, maybe, couldn't we?
Easily.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
And thanks for tuning in to Crowd. We'll be back with another guest on the next episode.